Hi, this is Dustin with Dustin's Dollars. Today I'm going to be talking about MicroStrategy, whether it is a good proxy for Bitcoin that you could hold in a brokerage account, and what could be the potential pros and cons of using this strategy. Before I begin, let me remind you that I'm not a financial advisor or a financial professional of any sort. All opinions that I express in this video are mine and do not represent those of any company or any other individual. I do not hold any position in MicroStrategy. In case I mention it, I do hold a position in Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, and I hold some Bitcoin. So this video should be for your entertainment purposes only, because I could be wrong about everything I say in this video. You need to do your own research before making any investment decisions. So last video, I talked about Grayscale Bitcoin Trust as a potential proxy for Bitcoin if you want to actually gain exposure to Bitcoin in just any brokerage account, such as what most folks have available in like their IRA or their 401k. So I went through that. Today I want to talk about one of the other popular options that folks have used to gain exposure to Bitcoin without having to actually hold Bitcoin itself, and that is a company called MicroStrategy. I'm going to go through today sort of why that has been why it functions as a Bitcoin proxy, and what are some of the unique risks and pros and cons of doing so. So this is a 2-year chart of MicroStrategy versus Bitcoin. MicroStrategy is in the blue line, Bitcoin is the red line. Hopefully that comes through reasonably well on the video that you can see there. But you can see that MicroStrategy has, roughly correlated with the price movements of Bitcoin over the past 2 years. You can see there is some difference. It certainly hasn't been perfect by any means, and that is because MicroStrategy is a company, right? And so there's actually in the same way that we saw for Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, there's sometimes it trades up, sometimes it trades down as compared to Bitcoin itself. MicroStrategy as well has moved around. So, but you can see that it roughly has matched the similar price movement. So let's go on and just talk about a couple things about MicroStrategy real quick. So it is a $3.1 billion company in terms of market cap. And MicroStrategy is a software company. That is their core business. I think strategy, that's going to get, of course, it's going to have a bunch of hits in MicroStrategy. If I go down to, let's see, management's discussion, I think it is, or maybe, here we go, description of the business. They say MicroStrategy pursues 2 corporate strategies in the operations of its business. One strategy is to acquire and hold Bitcoin, and the other strategy is to grow our enterprise analytics software business, right? And so they have an enterprise analytics software business, and that is what they did, I think, prior to 2021, right? They say in the first quarter of 2021, we adopted basically a strategy to buy and hold Bitcoin as their primary reserve asset. Of all the excess money they have left over, they said, hey, we're going to just buy and hold Bitcoin with it. And if we do actually go and look at their financials, this is going to be important in a couple minutes. You look at their financials in 2020, 2019, 2018. You can see that in 2018 and 2019, right down here, they actually did have positive net income, right? 22 million in 2018, 34 million in 2019. I think in 2020, I'm not positive, but I think in 2020 that's when they started dabbling in some Bitcoin, or maybe they had some COVID issues. I don't know. I have not. I'll give the caveat that I haven't dug deep into the software side of the business. I've been really interested in evaluating MicroStrategy as a proxy for Bitcoin, so that's where most of my time has been spent. My working assumption is that the software side of the business is profitable, and I have sort of used the rough projection that I figure maybe it makes about $50 million of net income if they were focused just on the software side of things, right? And I'm sort of just extrapolating from 22 million in 2018, 34 in 2019. Looks like maybe some mixed results in 2020. So let's just hand wave for today and say, well, let's say they made roughly about $50 million of net income. I'm going to use that in a model in just a minute when I talk about Bitcoin, the Bitcoin value of MicroStrategy. But if we look at their balance sheet, right, and this is at the end of Q2, June 30th of this year, you can see overall they had about $75 million worth of cash. If we go down to their debt, right, they had quite a bit of debt, 2.4 $2.37 billion of debt. It's actually slightly higher in terms of principal value, I think. And then we look at their we say, huh, like $70 million of cash and 2.5, billion in debt, right? And they're only making like $50 million a year in terms of net income. Something doesn't quite, add up there. And this is the piece that, you're missing if you just look at those, and that is their digital assets, right? And these are their Bitcoin holdings. And that's worth about $2 billion. And I say about because the accounting rules in Bitcoin are kind of funny. So that's, you don't really want to look at the balance sheet to get a good idea of that. But luckily, MicroStrategy does list this out, and I believe somewhere in here it should say precisely right here. Yeah, so 129,699 Bitcoins. That is how much they held at the end of June of 2022. I'm not sure if they've purchased more since then. I know that Michael Saylor, who is the founder and until very recently, I believe, the CEO of MicroStrategy, was, has continued to accumulate Bitcoin, within MicroStrategy, the company. So it's possible they hold slightly even more now, but I'm going off the numbers in their Q2 report here. And so if we look at this, they have about, they're roughly balanced in terms of their assets and their liabilities to, they have about rough parity there. Now, the other thing we're going to look at here is how many shares they have. And then I'm going to take that and put it into a model to say, how many shares of MicroStrategy would you need to have exposure to 1 Bitcoin? What does it actually look like in terms of, your cost structure there? So if we look at their outstanding shares, we can see that they have about 9.3 million Class A shares and just under 2 million Class B shares. These the Class Bs are convertible 1-to-1 into Class As. The only difference, I believe, is that the Class Bs give 10 times as many votes, which I will mention later on when I talk about the risks of this company. So I guess we could go ahead and look real quick also at the income statement or the statement of operations, and you can see if we exclude their digital impairment losses, you can see they had a gross profit of about $96 million. And if you add up their sales and marketing, R&D, and G&A expenses, just eyeballing it, it's roughly matches what their gross profit was, right? So the business as of right now was roughly running at about break even according to these numbers. I'm sure that some of this G&A, some of those expenses are probably directly attributable to the Bitcoin strategy, the buy and hold of Bitcoin strategy. It's possible that there's some overhead and, legal, accounting, those sorts of things. So I think maybe some of that could actually be attributed to the Bitcoin and not to the core software business. But for now, I'm just, again, kind of assuming that as of right now, it's roughly a break-even business, their core software businesses. Or at least that's one way to think about it. Another way, again, is like that it has the potential to probably generate about $50 million of net income, if we just sort of extrapolate from prior years before they started actually buying a lot of Bitcoin. So that is what it is. Now, let me hop on over and talk about some pros and cons, right, for this, and then I'm going to go into a model of the actual numbers. So the pros for holding MicroStrategy as a Bitcoin proxy, right? Because they certainly hold a lot on their balance sheet, and the positives for you if you do want to use this as a way to gain exposure to Bitcoin is that you can hold this in an IRA, in a 401k, right? Any brokerage account where you can buy publicly traded stocks. Presumably you can buy MicroStrategy, and unlike the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust that I showed last time that trades on the OTC markets, MicroStrategy trades right on the NASDAQ. So this is right there. It's fairly liquid. And this is popular because it's Bitcoin holding. So that gives it sort of an extra boost in popularity and in, trading volume, despite the fairly low float, right? In terms of, what did I say? Something like 11 million shares. That's a pretty small quantity of shares for the actual, for the number of outstanding shares, but it gets some extra benefit here just because of the popularity of the Bitcoin holdings. One of the other major positives that you have with MicroStrategy that you did not have with Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, or really with anywhere else that I am able to find, at least it's available to United States citizens, is the ability to trade options on your MicroStrategy shares, right? They have options. They have these going all the way out, to the leaps for 2024 and even January 2025. So, if you have ever wanted to be able to buy or sell options, to something that is closely correlated to Bitcoin, here you go. This is a major opportunity for you. This is positive in terms of being able to trade options on it. Now, some of the risks are, this is a company, right? This is not even Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. Their entire mission was to be a fund that just holds Bitcoin. This is a company. So, no doubts about it. There is a lot that's going on more than just we have an entity that's buying and holding Bitcoin. So there's lots of things that could happen there. And they do actually issue shares. If we look here, we can see that share-based compensation. If we go down to the most recent quarter, they talk about this, and they actually, I can't find it here. But anyways, they issued about $15 million. Oh, here you go. For the 3 months, ended June 30th, they recognize about $12.3 million in share-based compensation, right? So they are issuing shares to the employees. So you are slowly getting diluted over time based on that. And again, this is a company, so they can issue, more shares whenever they please. And Michael Saylor controls the whole company, right? And so this is Michael Saylor. Of course, I can actually type. Let's see if I can find it. Controls the voting power. Maybe within the 10K. Let me. I can't find it, but anyways, the point is he holds. Yeah, so here it is. I did find it. This is as of February 1st. Holders of our Class B common stock, own 67.8% of the total voting power, and actually Michael Saylor, he owns nearly all of the Class B shares, and so he alone holds 67.7% of the total voting power of the company. This was in the 10K, so this was as of February 1st. I don't think it's materially changed. I think he still holds the vast majority of the voting power of the company. So he can decide to do whatever he likes, right? He has all the power here. That is a risk for you as you would be a minority stockholder in this case with effectively no chance of being able to overrule anything he decides to do with the company. And one other thing here is that they do actually hold some convertible debt. So even when you're convertible, they have some convertible notes, some that are due in 2025, some that are due in 2027. And these could actually turn into a non-trivial amount of shares if it's in here. So it says if they get converted, right, there's some 2025 and 2027 notes. This could issue, about 1.6 million shares for the 2025 notes and about 700,000 shares for the 2027 notes, right? So that is a non-trivial amount of new shares. It's like 10% of the company. It's not gobs and gobs, but it is there is some conversion in the future with these notes. It could actually dilute you as a common shareholder. So that's something to keep in mind. And another one is that this Bitcoin is used as collateral for some of their loans. And so let me see if I can find the collateral. So here's like a whole paragraph describing some of the requirements that they have, right? They're using the Bitcoin, collateralized by Bitcoin. And they, with this particular loan, right, this is a 2025, a loan due in 2025, that they have to keep a certain, loan to collateral value ratio. And the value of that collateral, which is Bitcoin, goes up or down over time with the value of, the Bitcoin price itself, right? And so as Bitcoin, they even talk about it, I think, in one of these things where, in June 2022, as the price of Bitcoin declined, causing the LTV ratio to increase, then, Microstrategy, which is a subsidiary of Microstrategy, actually had to deposit, 10,000 additional Bitcoins to bring that ratio back in line to where it needed to be, right? So this Bitcoin is being used as collateral. It is possible the Bitcoin price could fall so far that, the value of all the 130,000 or so Bitcoins that they hold is no longer large enough for them to actually have enough collateral for this loan. At that point, they could be forced liquidated, and actually, you could have MicroStrategy might not hold any Bitcoin anymore, right? If Bitcoin really, really crashed, that is possible. I doesn't seem like it's likely, but who can predict the future, right? So it's possible that that could happen. So that is a material risk if you are planning to use MicroStrategy as a proxy for Bitcoin. So let's get into it and talk about, is one of the things I talk about with Grayscale Bitcoin Trust is that, if you want to buy one Bitcoin's worth of, under holdings beneath the shares that you actually buy, you are paying less than what the market price of the Bitcoin is at the current moment, right? And that is to say that Grayscale Bitcoin Trust trades at a discount to its net asset value. MicroStrategy is a completely different beast because they are a publicly traded company, and there's actually a wing of the company that is an operating software business. So put together a model here to look at what is the effective cost per Bitcoin if you are to buy MicroStrategy shares. So let me walk through this model real quick. Top to bottom, right? So we have the number of shares of MicroStrategy outstanding. Oh, by the way, sorry, I should say I have two columns here because I looked at two different scenarios. One scenario was that none of the debt is converted. And so, in this case, I basically forget the fact that some of that debt is convertible and just treat it as debt that would be sort of included in the cost here of in the enterprise value of the company. And then I looked at an additional scenario, which was, let's say they never have to pay back that debt because it actually gets converted into shares. How does that change the numbers if we're looking at what is sort of the overhead cost or the discount, right, relative to Bitcoin? So go through just the first scenario here. If no debt gets converted, that means they have about 11.3 million shares outstanding, and they hold, as I said before, just under 130,000 Bitcoins. So the number of MicroStrategy shares you need per, in order to get exposure to one Bitcoin, you divide those out and you say, hey, you need about 87 shares of MicroStrategy to get the exposure of one Bitcoin's worth. So MicroStrategy's closing price on Friday was, I think, in after hours, $281. So you do your multiplication there and you say, okay, well, great. In order to get the exposure of one Bitcoin, I need to buy about $24,482 of MicroStrategy stock. So there's your answer. However, that's not quite, it's not where I ended my model because I also want to look at a couple other things, right? Because when you're buying those shares, you're not just buying the Bitcoin, you're buying a share of the whole company. And so the other things I wanted to look at here is what do we think the, how to factor in all that debt, right? This is not just, free and clear Bitcoin holdings. They also have a bunch of debt out there. So if we look at that $2.4 billion worth of debt that they have, subtract off the cash, which is not much, but, included in the model anyways. And you look at this and you say, well, how much debt do they actually have? It was subtract off the cash. How much debt do they actually hold per share of MicroStrategy? And that's about $207 per share. And so if you multiply that out by the number of shares you need to hold exposure to one Bitcoin, that turns out to be about $18,000 worth of debt that you would have exposure to, or that you would basically be, owning if you are buying enough shares to have exposure to one Bitcoin's worth of MicroStrategy. So another thing to factor in here as we're sort of walking through this is how do we value the software business? I put it at $1 billion. Maybe if you want to be a little more conservative, you could say 500 million. But I had originally put in at $1 billion under the assumption that, well, if they focus just on this, made a profitable business, it could make about $50 million in net income per year. Put a 20p on that, that's $1 billion business. And so there you go. And if we factor that in, the value of, divide by the number of shares, and we say, well, you actually get, $88 worth of value per share because of that software business, right? That is actually something that has its own value. And so this is kind of like treating it as if it were, a cash item worth that amount, since we're sort of looking at a balance sheet style of a way of computing things here. So if we add all those together, right? If we have the cost of the Bitcoin, and then we also throw in the cost of the debt, but then we subtract off the cost of the software business because you're not really paying that. That's value that you're getting when you buy the shares of MicroStrategy. Through this model, I compute that you have about an effective cost per Bitcoin if you buy that one exposure of one enough shares of MicroStrategy to get exposure to one whole Bitcoin, you're paying about 34,000, just under actually $35,000 in order to get that. And so that versus the current Bitcoin price of $20,500, and I think you're paying quite a premium in my opinion, right? Because you are assuming all of that debt is, or the the company has all of that debt that those shares are, those shares represent that company there, and so you're actually in sort of the way that I look at things. I think you're paying quite a bit over in order to actually get exposure to Bitcoin through MicroStrategy. So this might be okay to you, it might not, but it is that is sort of the way that I view things. One thing to note though, right, is that this debt is not going to go up or down with the value of Bitcoin. And so, sort of to my prior discussion or the prior point that I made about if the value of Bitcoin actually goes down a lot, this could get wiped out because, that Bitcoin is being used as collateral for some of these loans. But you also have some of this, if you look at the flip side, right? If Bitcoin goes up a lot, and I threw in a number that I personally don't think is unreasonable for Bitcoin to reach in the next couple of years. A lot of folks in the cryptocurrency space were predicting for Bitcoin to hit this in the last sort of cycle. But let's just throw it out there at $100,000 per Bitcoin, right? Let's say it goes past the prior peak of about 70,000, goes up to 100,000. The premium that you're paying still is the premium that you're paying right now, but in percentage terms, if Bitcoin is actually worth $100,000, the premium that you paid is significantly less, right? So if you actually have a positive outlook for Bitcoin, you may not have quite so much sticker shock at the 69% additional premium that you're paying right now for MicroStrategy shares versus the actual just underlying Bitcoin. You might want to look at it as, what do I think Bitcoin is going to be in the future? And, you could look at it, how much additional value you would get per share if the price of Bitcoin rises, if we just assume that accrues directly to the MicroStrategy shares. And then you look at, what would the MicroStrategy share price be at 100,000 Bitcoin? And we can look at what is your actual premium there. Your premium that you would pay in this situation would be, relative to $100,000 for Bitcoin, about 14% rather than 69%. So that may be, another way to look at things. That is, if you are actually bullish on Bitcoin itself and want to use this. The other scenario that I, mentioned is that if that convertible debt actually gets converted, right, we have to look at this. The differences from the column B here to this scenario are, you have more shares outstanding, right? Almost 2 million additional shares, a little more than 2 million additional shares. And so therefore you have to actually buy more shares of MicroStrategy if you want exposure to one whole Bitcoin. And so therefore it actually costs you more, right? Because you have to buy more shares. But the debt that is, sort of represented by the company, your percent of the company that you'd own with those shares is much lower, right? Because that debt goes away because it's converted. And as a result, you're only looking at about $5,000, overhead in terms of debt per one Bitcoin's worth of holdings of MicroStrategy. So you add that all up, and then you factor in also the value of the software business here, again, at $1 billion. And you come up with an effective cost per Bitcoin of, just under $27,000. And so that's actually better than the no debt conversion scenario, right? Because you're paying about a 30% premium rather than almost 70%. And again, if you think the Bitcoin is going to go much higher, and if we, run the numbers at $100,000 Bitcoin, your premium that you paid actually goes all the way down to about 6% premium. So still not nothing, but it's possible that, that if you hold some of these as assumptions of things that are, you think are very likely to happen, you may be okay paying, what I would sort of view as a 6% premium to the price of Bitcoin to be able to hold, to be able to get exposure to, Bitcoin's price in something like an IRA or a 401k or some other account that is, otherwise limited and doesn't actually let you get exposure to Bitcoin. So that is my model. That is how I look at things. Again, I don't currently hold any MicroStrategy, but I think it is a tool in the toolbox if this is something that, sort of, if that's a problem that you have. So All right, that was everything for today. Nothing on the live chat, so I will hop off. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it.